biggest change in me since I've taken the Dale Carnegie course is my ability to project, to be honest, to project and to actually speak up in meetings, speak up in crowds, speak up. My name is Serenia Granville, and I'm a graduate of the Dale Carnegie School. My inner voice comes from a younger me, an 8-year-old girl who was constantly told that she would not amount to much. In meetings for my professional life, my career life, I knew I didn't communicate with my audience well. I had to reach down inside of myself and say, Serenia, it's time to develop your speaking skills, your presentation skills. My aha moment in the course was when I learned that everyone that goes up to speak is nervous, right? But the difference is that they actually endured their nervousness. That was my breakthrough moment, knowing that others experience this same nervousness. You have this one life to live. One life. Make the best of this life. Make the best of it.
If you look at it and you say, am I the type of person that wants to improve? Am I the type of person that wants to learn? Am I the type of person that wants to move forward in life? Then this is a great course. So my name is Glenn Calicura. I'm very introspective, so I look at myself as, what more could I do to be a better person? What more can I do to be more effective in my job? How can I advance in my career? How can I be more successful? So if I can find tools, methods, programs, things to help me, then that's what I should do. At my company, there's a lot of moving parts, but a lot of times the stronger personality wins in the room. And I think what Dale Carnegie's course taught me is everybody's opinion matters. You too could have strength to be able to convey your opinion in an effective, clear way. And that technique gave me a lot of confidence. It's important to be honest. It's important to be genuine. It's important to be trustworthy. There were a few incidents in the class where people had shared really personal stories about their life and what they've been through because there was a relevance to the topic. But what they were really doing was getting out of their shell, and that's part of the program, right? It might not just be a course, for people. It could be a changing event in their life. If you look at it and you say, am I the type of person that wants to improve? Am I the type of person that wants to learn? Am I the type of person that wants to move forward in life? Then this is a great course. So my name is Glenn Calicura. I'm very introspective, so I look at myself as, what more could I do to be a better person? What more can I do to be more effective in my job? How can I advance in my career? How can I be more successful? So if I can find tools, methods, programs, things to help me, then that's what I should do. At my company, there's a lot of moving parts, but a lot of times the stronger personality wins in the room. And I think what Dale Carnegie's course taught me is everybody's opinion matters. You too could have strength to be able to convey your opinion in an effective, clear way. And that technique gave me a lot of confidence. It's important to be honest. It's important to be genuine. It's important to be trustworthy. There were a few incidents in the class where people had shared really personal stories about their life and what they've been through because there was a relevance to the topic. But what they were really doing was getting out of their shell, and that's part of the program, right? It might not just be a course, for people. It could be a changing event in their life.
Hello, my name is David Urban. I am the Dean of the Jennings A. Jones College of Business at Middle Tennessee State University. I'm happy to welcome you to the first event of what we envision to be an entire series of lifelong learning seminars focusing on current and emerging topics in business. Today's presenter is Allyn Walker. Allyn is the managing partner of Dale Carnegie, Georgia and Tennessee, and he has led his team since 2001, resulting in multiple years of revenue and profit growth. Allyn is a facilitator and a coach with a driven focus on other people's success. His strengths are seeing how to implement talent development projects within organizations, resulting in cultural transformation. His organization has been recognized as top 5 in global revenue, top growth and top 10 in market penetration, top cumulative annual growth rate, top quality in North America based on Net Promoter Scores. And Allyn has also been recognized with the highest honor among Dale Carnegie franchisees, the One Dale Carnegie Award, recognizing his contributions to the greater Dale Carnegie Global Network. In addition, his organization has been a finalist many times for the Better Business Bureau's Torch Awards for Ethical Commerce. I've had the pleasure of working in partnership with Allyn on the Jones College Dale Carnegie Initiative, which began in 2014. Since 2015, all undergraduate business majors in Jones College have been required to take the Dale Carnegie course in Human Relations and Communication. To our knowledge, Jones College is the only collegiate business school in the country that requires its students to take this course as a way to improve their soft skills. By the end of the 2021 fall semester, over 4,500 students will have completed the course, and the effect on their self-confidence, communication abilities, human relations skills, leadership development, and attitude formation has been nothing short of transformational. Today's presentation is based on data from the Dale Carnegie Global Research Team. They survey global businesses for trends and issues that impact employees and organizations. Today's presentation combines reports from their research with gathered data from industry experts. Today's topic is From Survive to Thrive, Tipping the Balance to Support a Resilient Workforce During the COVID-19 Crisis and Beyond. Please welcome Allyn Walker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Urban. It is an honor to have an opportunity to work with leaders in the community who aren't satisfied with where they are right now, but always looking to strive forward. It reminds me of a quote from Mr. Carnegie where he said, in reference to change, welcome it, court it. It's only by examining and re-examining our beliefs do we truly progress. And I thought that was appropriate for a lifelong learning series where we're looking for an opportunity to continually become better at what we do organizationally, individually, and in the communities in which we serve. The reality is over the last 2 years, examining and re-examining our beliefs has been a requirement. It's been a standard. It's been a whether you want to or not. You're going to have to constantly be thinking about what we do and why we do it and how we do it as well. And so when we took a look at what's going on in the marketplace today, we wanted to see how can we go from, to use some Maslow language, survive to truly thrive in the environment ahead. And so I'm excited to have this opportunity to do several things today with us. The first thing, if you just take a look at the areas of focus in terms of objectives, is we are going to take a look at those concepts of resilience in light of COVID-19. You'll find that we'll be revealing some research that was conducted in 2020. Now, full disclosure, February of 2020, a lot of things changed, but I do think it provides a grounding of what people are thinking about in terms of resilience and then how that's been impacted moving forward. We'll look at those research by our organization, and then Dale Carnegie is about practical tactics. So discuss some practical tactics as what we can do as leaders in organizations today. One concept that some of you might be familiar with, particularly if you're familiar with military terms, is this idea of Vuca. So Vuca is this volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It was used by the military to describe aspects of the Cold War and how we respond to them. But it's definitely a concept that I think we can all agree with today as we think about over the last year and a half. Volatility, the continuing volume and speed of change that we're dealing with organizations. In fact, it's not just one change. And when we think about COVID and so forth, sometimes it's more than just the one change. It is bigger changes than multiple changes that we're dealing with. In fact, most organizations would say that you have 2 to 3 changes that you're dealing with consistently, ongoing over a period of time. And so when you look at the different change arcs that you deal with in an organization, it's not just one, but multiples that we're dealing with. I think uncertainty, it has been hard to predict what's going to happen next. I have looked at, and I'm sure everyone else has, the New York Times site that shows the different bells and curves of the COVID crisis. We were just taking a look at that in our Atlanta office as to what was happening in the Georgia region. And it's hard to know where we are now. Is that going to be the same? I think for many of us, we have established business plans, and in the back of our mind, we're thinking we hope for a good 3 months, maybe 6, just because we've learned, if anything, things change in this process. Complexity, there's interconnected factors. Most notably recently looking at the global supply chain crisis, where how things interact with each other in a way that creates complexity in our environment. And then finally, just the ambiguity, the lack of clarity. Many business leaders ask us, well, what about a hybrid environment? And I think a lot of people are still figuring out what that looks like, how that looks like, what people want to do, and what that's going to mean for the office setting ahead. And so when we think about the Vuca world that we live in, these are things that may have been precipitated by the pandemic, but they're also ongoing that we deal with as leaders. And so when we think about just in specific the global effects of COVID-19, none of these, I believe, would be a surprise to our leaders on the call today. We certainly are dealing with a K-shaped recovery in the United States, where some organizations are thriving, others are still down quite a bit. It's interesting, this was an article that was published a few months back. It talks about unemployment. But I think we're also seeing another factor that's at play, which is the increased retirements. There was a Wall Street Journal article in September that said that there were 1.5 million retirements by baby boomers. I'm sorry, the article said there were 1.5 million more retirements from baby boomers than was expected. And so you have a labor workforce that is one of the lowest rates that it has been in decades. So the talent war is increasing for organizations today. And then the strategies that we have for multinationals, how we work and interact with things globally, certainly have a difference. And so when we think about what organizations are facing, these are some that we see when we talk to organizations and in our research. The question that I would ask those that are here live in the audience and those that might be online as well would be, as you take a look at these factors, which ones in particular are important for your organization today? So if you are in the online environment, please put that into the chat feature or the comment feature. We have someone monitoring that as well. In addition to that, for those that are here, we see these 5 areas of focus. So the shift to remote workforce and what that means coming back, hybrid work moving forward. The decisions that we have as leaders and how we make those decisions with the complexity and the Vuca that we just identified. Demand and supply fluctuations. The supply chain crisis is real for many organizations that we work with. Inadequate technology and processes. Are we catching up fast enough with what we want to see happening? And then finally, what happens to our culture and our brand in the marketplace when we sustain ourselves into an environment where we can't all be in the same physical space? So again, if you're in the online environment, this is an opportunity for you to add your voice to the conversation that we're having, and we have someone monitoring that as well. I would also say, in the meantime, for those that are in the room, a comment or two in reference to which one of these areas do you find is the most difficult you're facing as an organization today? Who might be first to share an idea? Yeah.
I think the difficulty in maintaining culture is a real issue for a lot of organizations I'm familiar with.
Yeah, so the comment is in reference to the difficulty in maintaining culture, and we're getting a lot of head nods as well from others that are here in that particular area. To dive a little deeper to that, Sean, what do you see as some of the factors that are influencing that culture? What is the challenge that the organizations are identifying?
Well, I think to meet the needs of our customers at TSU, we've had to have a pretty big technology shift. And because of that, our faculty have had to go online.
Yeah, okay. So how we work, how we interact with those that we're in. There was a social psychology experiment where they talk about different types of connections that we have with others, and we have what we would call close connections or loose connections. And what they determined is that cultures that were really strong coming into the pandemic had some sustainability to that culture. But what they found, and of course many organizations are saying today, is now you have a certain percentage of your workforce that has been hired since the pandemic began and has never had that in-office culture experience. And so what is the sustainability of the culture moving forward when you have folks that have not been with each other? I see it all the time in those live online environments. I was just working with an accountancy today, and many people were either new, they had not met the people they were online with, they'd never been in physically the same space with those individuals. And because of the fast pace of work, it's hard to have those water cooler, coffee pot, chat before the meeting moments where you just get to know people. And so back to the connections article, it said those organizations with strong connections are able to sustain. Anybody in the organization with a loose connection is at risk, because they don't have the social dynamics of keeping connected to the environment. And in the talent war that's happening, anybody who doesn't have that hard connection with others is then open to look for other work, because, again, locality isn't important anymore. Anybody can recruit anybody from almost anywhere. A comment from the online.
Yes, just so you know that there's a slight delay, so some of these might be about something you're talking about.
Okay.
So many are wanting to, this is from Paula.
Hi, Paula.
So many are wanting to see things go back to normal, meaning back to the way things were. Others want to move in a new direction because we found that it works, like working remotely.
And that goes right into that difficult decisions for leaders, and what does work look like moving forward in your particular space. Some of us might like that office. Some of us don't like the commute to that office space, and like the flexibility of being around those that we live and work with in a continuing era. So yeah, that is a difficult decision of what is the right script moving forward for our teams, which is tied back to the culture question as well. What type of team are we? There was an article in, I think it was in Harvard Business, where they were talking about some of the firms in New York City that were going to require people to be in office, and the immediate retention issues that they ran into with that decision. It's hard decisions to be made. So when we think about these effects that we're focusing on as organizations, we did do a study, as I mentioned, in February of 2020. We took a look at this concept of resilience, because what we find is that resilient organizations are going to have benefits in dealing with not just any Vuca world that we live in, but in particular with the pandemic and the complexities of it. So one of the areas that we took a look at were, what are some of the stressors that people were facing even before we started in with the COVID-19 crisis. It's interesting when you look at the items that are up there. I'm not sure if any of this has changed significantly. Now, certainly the security concerns and health concerns I'm sure, up on the list. But the exhausting workloads, has our workloads dropped? And in fact, I'm sorry, I'm getting a reaction from some in the room here. They're like, no, I don't think so. And I got a double thumbs up. I don't think that was I'm doing a good job. I think that was it's gone way up in terms of the workload. One of my colleagues had said, I don't think I've worked as hard as I have over the last year and a half to get anything kind of traction done. Obviously, the changing of job roles. We are doing very different things than we might have been doing when this pandemic started. And so we're all flexing. I know for my organization, we're really trying to think about what happens when you move from the foxhole to a sense of normalcy. We were kind of in battle mode for a while, and now we want to get back into a normalcy role. So what is my role that we have? I don't know, maybe difficult relationships with coworkers. Maybe it's better. I guess I could ignore them. But if I had a difficult relationship, I don't know if it got better. Only if distance makes the heart grow fonder, I suppose. But I do think it makes working through situations more challenging. I've had some, in fact, 2 days ago, I was in a conversation with global leaders in our business. And a comment that I made as a Dale Carnegie initiate, I made a comment, and another Dale Carnegie trainer took it exactly the opposite of what I intended, and we had this little Zoom moment in this. And we ended up calling each other later because we realized that in the virtual environment, it was difficult to quite read how the reaction was coming across. And so we had to spend time and sort that out, which we were good. It happened to be my CEO, so I'm really glad that we were good when it was done. But those relationships become important. So the reality is that stress accumulates. Like anything else in our body that accumulates, stress accumulates. And so when we think about resilience and stress management, it's not just one thing, but it's the one thing on top of another thing on top of another thing on top of another thing. That our people have not just the work stress, but they have the family dynamics. They have perhaps loved ones that are with them or not. They have all these factors that accumulate the stress to where, I don't know about you, but I certainly find reactions sometimes are more robust than they would be under a normalized environment, which is why resilience becomes really important. And what we can do to feed into our people's resilience becomes critical, as a leader. And so when we look at resilience on the whole, so you'll see the source in terms of the study. When they're taking a look at reactions to trauma in clinical psychology, and what they looked at was really 4 different types of reactions to high stressor environments that we fall into. That there certainly is those of us among us that are that top line where they are just resilient individuals, and it may fluctuate up and down, but they just have it down. And they're the people that we would know, look to, and perhaps could identify in our mind as they just have that grit, that resilience, that bounceability in them. And there's others of us where, sometimes for a variety of reasons, we aren't as resilient as we would want to. It's kind of a chronic stress that causes us not to be as resilient. I think a lot of us probably fall in between the lines. That for some of us, when we started this process, we had a high level of health, but the stress has kind of increased. So that line has increased as we've gone up to where we have this delayed reaction to dysfunction. Some of us maybe started with a quick reaction, what am I going to do? But over time, it's normalized for us, and we've gotten into a more functional environment. Many of us might be at that inflection point. I was talking to a couple in the room ahead of time. We had an opportunity to go to Disney World over our fall break here in Rutherford County. My daughter is a senior in high school, and that was her choice. She wanted to go to Disney World. And it was a unique experience going to Disney World with adult children. And one of the things that we started noticing was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We started calling the wailing hour, because it seemed about 3 o'clock in the afternoon was that inflection point where some of the little ones had kind of lost it, and transparently, some of the older ones started to lose it. Well, and you could just kind of hear, we would be waiting in line, we hear this, just kind of popping up like, whack-a-moles all over the park, that inflection point. And I think for many of us, we're at that inflection point. Are we going to move towards more function, an opportunity to be resilient, or is it going to become more chronic and more dysfunction? And as leaders, we can make a difference in that opportunity. Darby, you mentioned there could be a comment in the chat that we want to pull into the conversation.
Yes. Jim said, you mentioned the talent war. How do organizations continue to diversify their workforce in these turbulent times? And he also asked if you could repeat the question.
So repeat the question that... Yes, so the question is in terms of the talent war, how do we continue to diversify our organization in terms of bringing in talent? I think that the culture and the environment that we bring allows for diverse talent to be drawn into the organization. We're going to talk a bit about inclusion, particularly as it relates to psychological safety and culture in the organization, because what we find is that psychologically safe environment becomes an inclusive environment, which then allows for the result of diversity in terms of who's coming on board in the organization. So when we think about resilience, I use the term bounce. So when we think about resilience, it refers to our ability to bounce back from adverse experiences. How do we bounce? In terms of characterize our ability to cope, recover, and learn from the things that happened for us. And underpinning those behaviors that support a mindset that's open to information and primed to succeed, specifically a positive attitude and confidence that we have. I think of my garage when I think of bouncing. We, for some reason, as a family, decided to get a competitive tournament quality foursquare ball. I'm not sure what foursquare tournaments occur. I'm sure it's YouTubeable in terms of if this actually happens. But for us, if we were going to get a foursquare ball, it had to be tournament quality foursquare. And so we kind of put it out into our driveway, and that's one of the things that we've been doing is playing foursquare. Because I'm 12 and I like foursquare. But what I realized, if you leave the ball alone, it gets flat. And of course, a foursquare ball, like a playground ball, if it doesn't have air in it, it's not a lot of fun. You just hit it and it plods. It doesn't actually bounce. But it has the stuff of bouncing. It just needs the air of it. Now, in addition to that, I also have some bowling balls in my garage as well. They don't bounce. They just, they just stud because they're concrete. They're hardened, if you will. They don't have the flexibility of a playground ball or a basketball or a soccer ball. And so when we think about resilience, it's around kind of like what we have, but it's also the air that we put into it that creates the resilience, which is what we're going to be focusing on here. There's a lot of benefits to resilience that I think we could identify as we look through. There's several up organizationally, individually, and from a team perspective. But how we're going to take a look at it is, first of all, people are more resilient than we think. I think we might say that I'm resilient, but those other people, it's kind of like when I'm driving on the interstate. I think I'm a great driver, but all those other people driving. And someone once asked, well, if everybody drove like you, how would the interstate roll? And I think it'd probably be a disaster, right? Because I'm a little bit more on the aggressive side in terms of driving. I think the same thing is true of resilience. We might see ourselves as resilient, but those other people, there's a lot of resilience. The studies show that over half the people are highly resilient and 38% moderately resilient. So if you're going to ask that question, are we dealing with bowling balls or tournament quality foursquare balls? People have resilience in them. It's our opportunity as leaders to push the air in. So final question that we'll have, and I'm just curious as a poll, if you're watching online, if you would go ahead and put your answer in. What would you say of these three? Resilience, is it just an inherent trait? You're a tournament quality ball, or you're a bowling ball that's just the way it is? Is it something we can learn, or is it a result of a process? So I'm just as a curiosity. We'll hear from the online group in just a moment what they think. For those in the room, what would you say? Which is it? So Kim says it is a process that we go through. All right. Other thoughts, agreements, disagreements?
I'm saying yes, and yes.
Okay, Jackie says yes, yes, and yes. I want to choose all three. Answer D, all of the above. So tell me, Jackie, why do you say that?
There's some people that I see that really it seems like it's inherent for them. Other people, I feel like they've learned by observing others and we help them along the way.
Okay.
And the processes that we have in place can help the entire organization.
So in summary, the appreciation of, there are some that have more bounceability, if you will. It is certainly something that we can learn and we can teach, and organizationally we can build that through the processes that we focus on.
The online consensus so far is that it's something you can learn.
All right, so the online consensus is learn. That makes sense, as this is a lifelong learning series. I'm sure that you would think the answer has something to do with a learnable capability versus something that you got it or you don't. I do think some of us, just like are maybe more athletic than others, or perhaps have more artistic talent than others, or some of us that maybe have a little bit of wiring towards resilience. But my belief, particularly working for Dale Carnegie, is it is definitely something that we can learn, and it's a process that we can do that as well. So let's dive into what that might look like. So for us, in terms of supporting and developing resilience, we look at it at three layers: the individual focus, the team focus that we have, and finally what we can do organizationally that we lead to develop resilience in the organization. So we're going to take a first stab at the individuals as individuals. So there's a broaden and build theory that's listed here, which is basically that positivity allows a broad range of potential thoughts and behaviors from us as people. And over time, that helps build our physical, intellectual, social, and psychological resources. In layman's speak, what it's saying is when we're positive, we get better. A lot of neurological studies could show that when you have that positive attitude or spirit about us, that we find that we become more resilient. Daniel Kahneman was a prize-winning behavioral psychologist. He wrote a very thick book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in that, he looked at some of those studies that show that things like a smile and a positive spirit allow us to, frankly, do better on testing, be more creative, and be more productive in organizations. And so it's not just that we're saying that we have to be positive for positive sake. We're saying that the positive spirit allows us to get more things done. And I think the reason why is because a positive attitude engenders something within us, which is efficacy, meaning I can make a difference. Because when you think about times when we're stressed, those times where we feel like we don't have choices, we don't have options, and we're just stuck in the mud, are the times that we likely are getting less done, or we're more depressed, if you will, not clinically, but just thinking wise, versus the times where we feel like there's something we can do about it. And so as leaders, it's really critical for us to do a couple of things. And the first thing being is really focusing on that efficacy and using a term that we recommend, which is IWWCW. Now, IWWCW is just an acronym for in what ways can we? If you think about the times where you've been in conversations or you've been in opportunities with your team and you're trying to decide how can we become more a diverse workforce, or we're taking a look at opportunities in terms of what does hybrid work look like for us, that idea of in what ways can we engenders a positivity and an efficacy to the conversation versus a negative spirit of, well, we have these problems we have to solve. And so one practical thing we can do as leaders is looking at that in what ways can we to build that positive attitude and that confidence. In sports psychology, I think we see this all the time. In fact, are you supposed to use the word yips? I think that's a bad thing. But the idea of is sometimes for sports individuals in sports, they have a strong tie between self-confidence and performance. Confidence has been found to improve the coping abilities of athletes and the recoverability from injuries, and it's particularly useful when they need to cope with adversity. So if you can buy the idea that positivity influences resilience for the individual, well, then here are some opportunities for us. The final thought from our study is that when we looked at who's highly resilient versus people who are not, the respondents who have a consistently positive attitude are 71% highly resilient. In other words, there's a direct link between that positive attitude and resilience in the workplace. You can see that those who consistently feel confident in their skills were 2 times as likely to be defined as highly resilient. So what can we do? First element as individuals, I think as leaders as well, is in what ways can we? When we look at challenges and opportunities in the organization, in what ways can we? The second one is going to be tied to Marcus Buckingham's work around strengths. He does a lot of research around how we build ourselves from our strengths and by reminding ourselves of the things that we can do. So an exercise to be thoughtful is just to simply write down those strengths that we have. Either for those in the room or for those online, to spend some time and start writing down strengths. What are some things that I would say that I am good at? Even my mom would say, this is what I'm good at. Now, as you start to think about what are some of my strengths, a lot of us, in fact, those in the room are writing it down, which is excellent. Hopefully online you're doing that as well. What we find is that when you start writing down those strengths, you probably want to stop when you get to about 20. I got a lot of looks. You can't see that online, but I got a lot of looks. And basically that look is often when we think about strengths, we start with 1 or 2 or 3, and then we just, okay. But the reality is we have far more than that. I would say 15 or 20 is just a good starter. And that exercise of reading those strengths, identifying those strengths, and reminding ourselves of those strengths is an activity of resilience. One of my favorite quotes from Zig Ziglar is simply this. He would recommend this activity. He would say, write your strengths down and remind yourself of those on a daily basis. And he would say, some people would say, well, motivation doesn't last. And his response was, well, neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily. And if there was ever a moment when we have been dirtied up by the stress and the Vuca and all the things that have been impacting us, taking a little bath of, here are my strengths, here's my efficacy, here's the things I can accomplish, is going to, over time, develop more resilience for us as individuals. Just like lifting weights will help us be stronger, this will help us be stronger as well. Also, to be transparent, to explain the strategy and explain the trade-offs as leaders. When we're thinking about where we're headed, I think transparency is going to help people understand what is happening. And then the model for ourselves. One of my favorite quotes by Daniel Goleman, he did a lot of the original emotional intelligence research. And as he did that research, one of my quotes that I like from him is he said, "The mood of the leader is like a rock in the pond. You know, it ripples out through the organization." And we can certainly see that when we've been in person with our team. How we walk into a space, how we open up a meeting, people are already assuming things based off of that demeanor that we portray as a leader. I would say the same thing is true online as well. When that online meeting opens up, are we the one that's positive? Are we the one that's confident? And that's going to engender that within our team as well. So our mood is like a rock in the pond. So we have to first demonstrate that resilience by reminding ourselves of the positive things and the confidence that we have. So that's on the individual side. The second element is on the team side. And the two things that we want to focus on here is psychological safety and trusting relationships. And so when we look at those elements, one of the things that has been focused on for quite a bit, started by the Gallup organization, Blessings White also did this as well, is research around engagement. For approximately 14 years now, Dale Carnegie has also been doing research around engagement, but our focus took a different tact. Often, organizations would take a look at, well, what are the things we need to do to have an engaged workforce? The area that we focused on is when we have an engaged workforce, how do people feel? Because we find that we are emotional creatures, whether we want to be or not. And so we wanted to identify, regardless of what we're doing, what are the emotions that drive engagement for our team members? And what we determined is that of those who feel these three elements of engagement, which is I'm valued by the organization. By the way, the number one emotion people feel when they're engaged is I'm valued by the organization. And that might be because of the free lunches or the ping pong table or the whatever, but I feel valued by the organization. I'm connected to people. And then finally, I am empowered in my environment. In other words, I have efficacy. I have a voice. When those things occur, we know people are engaged. What we also saw was then people were resilient as well. It turns out an engaged workforce is a resilient workforce. And so focus in these areas help us as leaders with our team. Back to Marcus Buckingham, if you read his book, 9 Lies About Work, which he put out beginning of 2020, maybe it was in 2019, he said the number one factor for productivity has to do with the team environment. When he looked at who was engaged and productive in organizations, it was at this level, it was at the team level that he could track that. Now, Google would say the same thing with their Aristotle project, which is going to lead to psychological safety, but team effectiveness is one of the major drivers. It's also one of the drivers of resilience as well. So focusing this as a team. When we look at the other side of it, which is our social intelligence, here we're going to come into some of Dale Carnegie's sweet spot. So if you know anything about Dale Carnegie, you might know of a book that he wrote a bit ago called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was actually a couple of decades of research where he took a look at what was effective in building trust and rapport with others. It is some of the basis of the work that we do with organizations to increase that social intelligence that we have, and as MTSU, Jones College of Business, utilizes for their students as well. So when we take a look at what we're focused on, the relationships, there's a couple of factors that become really critical. The first one is that genuine interest that we have in others. Keyword, genuine. What we've learned over the last year and a half is everyone has a voice, and we want to develop that voice in the organization, and that creates inclusion. And one of the primary drivers of inclusion is I have a genuine interest in you and what you have to say. And that comes back to truly listen. There was another research project that's available for download a white paper on called Leadership Blind Spots that we did in 2018. And we identified the gaps between what we think we do as leaders and what we do as leaders. And one of the 4 blind spots was my leader truly listens. In other words, we often as leaders think we listen more than we might. Truly listen to our people. and then to respect those opinions that we have that come. The other element that what happens when we do that is we start to develop that second element, which is psychological safety. For those of you who are unaware of the Aristotle Project, it took a look at what the most effective teams were at Google, and they identified the one factor that they could tie to all the teams beyond experiences, beyond education, beyond all other elements. It was how safe is the team psychologically. And so stay attuned to psychological safety. One of the critical elements Mr. Carnegie talked about is our criticism, condemning, and complaining, which isn't about dealing with mistakes or dealing with hard issues. What it's about is how we react and how we respond to others. Do I see that person, hear their voice, and then want to have that conversation, or do I dismiss? When I criticize, condemn, or complain, I'm often just dismissing. Also, when we look at psychological safety, there's various levels. We just released a white paper on psychological safety, and one of the elements that we took a look at was the different layers of psychological safety. So often when we think about psychological safety, we think about the ability to speak up. And that goes to what Maslow would call belonging. Do I belong to the team? Another layer of that, though, is our ability, do I have the safety to learn? Now, we're in a lifelong learning series, so I hope that's the case in our organizations. But do I have the opportunity to learn, which also means, corresponding with that, do I have the safety to fail? So it's one thing to say speak up. It's another thing to not be able to step outside of that comfort zone because of the environment. The final level of psychological safety that's important for teams is what's called challenger safety. In other words, am I safe enough to challenge the construct of the conversation that we're having? I know I'm safe when I can. And that's going to cascade down to the other elements as well. One piece that, again, back to the hybrid work environment that we have to really be mindful of is studies that took a look at the safety of individuals who are physically in a space versus the safety of individuals who are virtually in that same space. And so as leaders, it becomes important for us that when we have people in the room and people online to make sure that both are included in that conversation, because what they found was that people who were disconnected virtually were less likely to challenge. They felt less safe to challenge, which means as leaders, we're losing voices, we're losing ideas, we're potentially losing solutions to the conversations. And so making sure that everyone has that connection moving forward. The third element that we focused on is developing resilience at an organizational level. So we first took a look at the individual, then we took a look at the team, and the final element is taking a look at the organizational level. So adequate work resources, the culture that we have, and then finally, the purpose that we have as an organization. I like this quote from Dale Carnegie. So I'll read it to you if you don't mind. If you believe in what you're doing, let nothing hold you up in your work. Much of the best work of the world has been done against seeming impossibilities. And I believe that Simon Sinek would say it's because you have your why. You have your intrinsic motivation, to reference Daniel Pink. That organizational purpose pulls us forward in our interactions with others. So here's a quick opportunity. For those of you who are in the room and online, write down your organizational purpose. Go. I'll give you, let's say, 30 seconds. We're going to hear a couple of examples in the room and online as well, if you would just type that organizational purpose into the chat or comment feature so we could hear some of those as well. Who's ready? We got some safety in the room, so go. So go for it. I think this is it. I just don't want to make it wrong. Okay. Who would call out their organizational purpose? Okay, we have some note comparing over here to make sure we got the right answer. That would not be acceptable, and some of the some of the professors would say, I don't think so. Are we on the same page? Okay.
College of Business to educate and prepare for their role.
I would say to serve our students so they can serve their community.
Serve our students so they can serve our communities, to educate for
And prepare for the real world.
and prepare for the real world. And that one too. Okay. Okay.
Mine is a little different, of course. So
Yeah.
I think maintain the safety and soundness in the economy.
Maintain the safety and the soundness in the economy. Bless you. Thank you. And bless you. We'll wait and see if we get some of those populate in the chat as well. One of the things that we believe as an organization is that everyone has inherent greatness. And so one of our purposes at Dale Carnegie is so that people can flourish and become a champion. And so that's part of what we do, why we do what we do. You know, when we think about what sustained us in terms of resilience, often it's that why. As I was walking into the room today and talking with some of the colleagues in the room, I couldn't help but start to share some stories of the why. Why I do what I do, because it's nourishing. It is a drink of cold water. It is a nice, tasty encouragement for us as we think about what we do. Now, the question would be, what would your people say if you asked them? Not that everyone has to get it exact, because everyone may articulate that in a different way. But is it the same purpose? Are we about the same things as an organization? And what we found is that those organizations with strong purpose found as an organization more resilience. And so often it really does, as Simon Sinek say, it does go back to the why. In this case, this is maybe the other side of the coin, if you will, of those without a shared sense of purpose at work. Over half were in the low resilient group, and only 1 in 5 were in the highly resilient group. So it's that big of a motivator for us in terms of our resilience organizationally, that tie to the purpose of what we're about. Which means as a leader, that creates an obligation to talk about that purpose, to engender that purpose, and to share that purpose. When I was reading about, several years ago, I was reading about the Ritz-Carlton organization. I was reading about it because I couldn't afford to stay there, but I was reading about the Ritz-Carlton organization, and it was called The Gold Standard, was the book. And one element just struck me is, at that time, and maybe even today, everywhere in the world, at every property that they had, they would share a customer success story. Same story that the CEO heard to the clerk at the Ritz-Carlton in wherever in Asia they have a Ritz-Carlton. Everyone heard the same story every day. And I thought, wow, 2 things really jumped out at me. The first one was the first thing that jumped out to me was the power of story. That often we have a statement around organizational purpose, and we also have a story behind organizational purpose. So the power of stories in their environment. But also the forging of a culture. We often have a culture based on the stories that we tell ourselves. That's why we tell certain stories to our children and to our grandchildren and in our communities. These stories shape culture. And so organizational stories can do the same thing for us. It does have that kind of impact on it. In addition to that, sharing and supporting that learning culture. Develop successes from failures. Discouragement and failure are 2 of the surest stepping stones to success. In other words, as an organization, we realize that we really can, as John Maxwell say, fail forward. And that develops, again, that learner safety as well. So again, we're going to have an opportunity for an exercise for those of you online and in person as well. As you think about a story that exemplifies the purpose you jotted down, what story comes to mind? So it could be a student. It could be a community. It could be What story comes to mind that defines for you the culture or the purpose that we have as an organization? So take 30 seconds and jot that story down. Now, the next opportunity is going to be for those of you in the room, and then for those of you online, I think we'll have this opportunity as well. For those in the room, you're going to have an opportunity to turn to the person sitting next to you and share with them that story that came to mind. Now, seeing as this is due to end at the top of the hour, this can't be the entire story, but perhaps an abbreviated version of the story that you thought of. For those of you who are in the online chat or comment, go ahead and just put a quick note of that story inside the chat as well. So those in the online environment can kind of hear some of those stories as well. So if you would, turn to the person sitting next to you and just say, "Aren't you glad you sat by me?" Yeah. Oh, they are. Although, to be fair, there were name tags, so it wasn't like they had a choice. Okay. If you would, just go ahead and share some of the key elements of that story. We will take a minute or so about 30 to 45 seconds each, just to give a real brief idea of what that story might be. Please begin. I think many of those in person are now switching roles so the other person gets a chance, although it's neat to see the body language when people tell that story. They truly light up, and we should. If this is something that's tied to our purpose, we should be lighting up when we're telling this story. All right. Oh, I'm seeing some smiles. I'm seeing some expressions. Just to allow the online audience to participate as well. What was the purpose and or story that was shared in the comment or chat?
One of the Jones College advisors, Paula, said when a student showed up in her graduation cap and gown and exclaimed, "We did it."
Oh.
She recognized my role in her accomplishment.
Oh, so in case you could hear that, Paula was mentioning that when one of the graduating students showed up in the cap and gown and said, "We did it," it really struck home that purpose of allowing success in others and being a part of that journey. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And would there be one in the room that we could share? I'm excited to hear this as well. Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of educating students to prepare them for the dynamic business environment, one of my students in the Dale Carnegie course not long ago, in his very last presentation, told us that at the beginning of the term,
You know, I'm just now realizing that I have a portable mic in my hand, and why this is like not a thing, I'm just going to give it to you. How about that? Okay.
in terms of educating students in a way that will prepare them for the dynamic global business environment, I had a student in my Dale Carnegie section who told the class at the end of the term in his final report, that at the beginning of the semester he was ready to quit school because he thought it was pointless and he wasn't getting anything out of his education. But the Dale Carnegie course and the skills that he saw in human relations and communication that really worked for him are what kept him in school, along with the supportive environment in the class. He has since graduated and moved on in his career.
oh, it's one of those things that you're just like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? This is what we're about, as an organization. And that's the value of the exercise. And so for those of you who are participating online and for those in the room, my encouragement, maybe challenge for you would be, share that story. Share that purpose with someone today. I know we're at the weekend. Maybe it's weird to talk about work on the weekend, but we're all working from home anyway, so might as well, go down and talk to the spouse or the partner or the cat and say, hey, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think it's as good for us as it is for them, but I think it's also something where people take a look and they go, wow. My daughter said something to me as we were going through this whole process, and she said, I hope I find a job that I love as much as you love yours. Now, that's pretty cool, and I need to be better at communicating, sharing, and reminding myself of the things that I love to do, because it's not just my resilience, but back to, from a leadership perspective, it's about our team. It's about our team as well. So I have up here on the board that this all pays off, right? So when we think about Dale Carnegie and lifelong learning and taking a look at this and resilience, and we might start to think to ourselves, yeah, this will be important, kind of. I'm going to get back to business. But the reality is this is business. This is how that we get these things done. We constantly focus with our clients in that when we look at these skills and concepts, it's not about I'll do this when I have time, but this is how I get things done in my organization. And so when we take a look at some of those results, when people are resilient, they're 2 times as willing to consistently give their best efforts. Wouldn't we want that? 2 times as willing to give their best efforts because of their resilience. They're significantly less likely to experience serious stress at work. Stress is going to come, whether we want it to or not. Would we want our people to be resilient to help with that? Significantly more likely to approach change by embracing it. That's pretty significant, 92% when they're in the highly resilient group. And I don't believe change is slowing down. It's something that's going to be consistently accelerating in our organizations. And so in many ways, you're preparing your workforce for that agility that's needed for the change that's coming. And 3 times more likely to be actively engaged. And if you followed any of the engagement research, you know how that applies towards everything from productivity to safety to sick days to anything that we can measure in a business engagement ties to. And so when we think about it from an organizational perspective, we want to tip the balance towards resilience. And so that allows for us to find ways to tip the balance of jobs and demands. In what ways can we? Live our organizational purpose and support a learning culture. Demonstrate social intelligence at all levels of leadership and build people's positivity and confidence. And so when we think about opportunities moving forward, one of the things that we're passionate about within the Dale Carnegie space is applicability, practicality, and doing something with what we talk about. And so commitments are important. Now, for us in this environment, you're like, I'm online, I'll never see you, maybe. But perhaps integrity will say, if you make a commitment, you'll follow through with it. I'll encourage you to do simply this. We've spent nearly an hour together thinking about resilience and thinking about what we can do to go move from survive to thrive. And I would be a poor Dale Carnegie trainer if I didn't at least ask for you to do this, which is, what will we do? More, less, better, differently based on the last hour. So let's make this an investment for ourselves in terms of action. So if you would, those of you who are in the room, you've got these nice pads of paper that you can jot an idea down on. What is your action moving forward based on what we discussed? For those online, if you would just simply put that in the chat or the comments. What is an action for you moving forward? Either individually, the positivity and the confidence, team-wise, the social intelligence or the psychological safety, organizationally, focusing in on purpose. What is an action moving forward that'll help build resilience so that we can move from that survive to thrive? Take a moment and jot something down. And those in the room know what's going on. They're going to have to talk to the person sitting next to them. You knew that when you walked in the room. I probably have to talk to this person. So if you would just make that commitment to another live human being. And for those of you online, hey, they're live too. So if you would in the chat, jot down what your action steps are going to be. And we'll hear a few of those. Go ahead and share with your partner now. So just turn to them and say, hi, it's me again. Oh, I'm always grateful as a facilitator or presenter when I know that something's going to happen based on the investment of time. So I'm hearing some great things. Could I hear from a couple in the room and maybe perhaps some online? What are some actions that we're going to take?
Well, I'm going to try to bring my group back together by showing their value in the Jones College and then the university.
Yeah.
How they're connected, what our purpose is while we're here.
Yeah. So bring the group together to show them their value and how they're connected with the broader, organization. Remind ourselves of those things. It's good reminders. Thank you, Gretchen. So Kim said, remind myself of my purpose every day. Just like I'm taking a bath, I'm going to take a bath in purpose and focus in on that. I like that. To keep that energy going and enthusiasm for ourselves. Let's hear one more. Okay. She said, I'm going to get out more. All right. That's it. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I like that. So the comment was, as in our environment, as mask mandates come down and more people are back into that physical space, to share that positivity, share a smile that we can see, and ask people how their day is going, create those connections intentionally. So be that culture officer for the organization to do that. And let's hear one from the online group as well. So Darby, what do we have?
She's going to collaborate with her team members. She says that she gets very serious about her caseload and forgets sometimes that there are others that she's working with.
So collaborate with team members and pull them in. We can get quite focused. I've just in terms of the virtual space, a couple of things that I was working with a client today, and the leaders have started office hours online. They're still in a hybrid work environment, so they have 30 minutes on their calendar. That's an open office hour for anybody who wants to drop in virtually, just like they would have dropped into their desk in person. They can drop in virtually with a question or a conversation. One that I particularly had fun with was a group I got online with, and everyone had a different background. It was their collegiate day. Of course, it would be very similar among this group, but just something of favorite for you. So perhaps a favorite vacation spot or a favorite sports team that you follow or whatever it could be. Everybody could express that in the backgrounds that they had and bring in some personality. I even saw one group where, because in this case they were still working from home, they did a virtual show and tell. So people could show their fur baby, or they could show something that they would normally have around the house. And again, it creates that connectivity. It creates some of that connection, right, to others and inclusion into the space. So again, the idea being is when we look at resilience, just like any type of fitness, it takes action. And so take deliberate action. When I think about Mr. Carnegie's quote that I started with, he said, welcome change, courted, it's only by examining and re-examining our opinions and beliefs can we truly progress. Well, he wrote that in 1946. And you think about what had happened in the previous 15 years globally. It certainly is one of those spaces, perhaps not quite, and in some specs what we're seeing now in terms of upheaval and change. We have to court it. We have to welcome it. It's by re-examining our beliefs we can truly progress. We have approximately 1 minute. I left 1 minute for questions. It's an old presenter's trick. If you don't want questions, you just don't leave time for questions. So we'll do this. So everyone, again, thank you so much for being a part of this in the online environment. Thank you for those who are here in person as well. I'm going to turn the microphone back over to Dr. Urban for concluding remarks. Thank you all.
And thank you very much, Allyn, for that informative and thought-provoking presentation. Please mark your calendars for our next lifelong learning event on February 4th, 2022. Allyn will be back and will be speaking about another interesting research-based topic. Also, for more information about Jones College programs, especially degree programs in virtual formats, go to mtsu.edu/business. Have a great day filled with resilience. Go Blue Raiders.